Welcome to the 802.11 Commentary Series. My name is Tom Carpenter with CWNP. In this series, we will explore the 802.11 standard as it is written, not necessarily as vendors implement it within their technologies. The goal is to help you understand this standard and to help you feel more comfortable when you read these standards for yourself. Here in the first video, we'll be looking at standards terminology and processes. Before we explore the standard itself in depth, let me share with you some important information about CWNP. CWNP provides a series of certifications that can take you from a beginner to an expert in wireless local area networking technology. The first entry-level certification is the CWTS, or the Certified Wireless Technology Specialist. In this case, the focus is on project managers, sales professionals, and those who want to start out in the wireless networking industry. We then have the CWNA certification. This is the Certified Wireless Network Administrator. This is for engineers, administrators, implementers, those who need to plan and implement wireless local area networks on an enterprise level without a specialty in any given area. In other words, you need to know everything from nuts to bolts to implement a wireless local area network. But when you want to specialize and increase your expertise, then you'll look to the CWDP, CWSP, and CWAP certifications. They are for design, security, and analysis or troubleshooting. The focus here is on really honing your skills in these specific areas. And for those who want to be elite experts in the industry, we have the CWNE certification. In this case, you have not only passed the certification exams to prove your knowledge of wireless local area networking, but you have also proven that you have experience working with this technology in the real world. You can always learn more about our certifications at cwnp.com, where you can learn all about the organization, the certifications that we offer, participate in valuable forums, and read blogs, as well as gain access to video training, practice exams, and more. Now let's begin our discussion of standards terminology and processes by talking about the IEEE hierarchy. The first thing we have is a project. This is the top level. It's also sometimes called a family or even a program by some. For example, 802 is a project. Now 802 covers local area networking and metropolitan area networking. So both of these types of networks are covered within the 802 project family. You have probably heard of at least a few of the different technologies that are provided as part of the 802 project. For example, Ethernet, Bluetooth, WiMAX, and yes, 802.11 Wi-Fi. You see, within the projects, we have what are called work groups or working groups that focus on a specific technology, either a local area networking technology or a metropolitan area networking technology. So 802.3 focuses on Ethernet LANs. 802.11 focuses on Wi-Fi LANs. Now, Wi-Fi is not a standard term. It is an industry term trademarked by the Wi-Fi Alliance, but this technology is defined in the 802.11 standard. We also have 802.15, which defines in part Bluetooth. We have 802.16, which defines WiMAX, and so forth. So there are many different working groups or work groups within the 802 project. Now, within a work group, we have a task group. Task groups focus on specific modifications or details of a technology. For example, there was the 802.11i task group, which was focused on enhancing the security for the 802.11 standard. Then there was the 802.11n task group, which focused on MIMO technology, giving us faster data rates and greater stability and reliability within our wireless local area networks. So these are task groups. They usually focus on amendments to the standard after the standard has been ratified. Now let's talk specifically about the standard development process. First of all, it all starts out with a project authorization request. So it has to begin somewhere, and it begins in the world of ideas. Someone indicates there is a need for a standard, and the standard will be beneficial to a large group of people. And once it is acknowledged that there is really a need for this standard, and that it would benefit a large group of people, and it would fill a technical need, then it can be voted on and approved to become a project or a task group within a project so that we can actually accomplish the end goal of implementing something in a standard. Now, once it has been approved the proposals are evaluated. In the early stages of a standard or an amendment to a standard, there may be competing recommendations or proposals for how we can actually accomplish our end goal. The concept then is that these are evaluated. Sometimes one is selected. Sometimes multiple are merged together to form an even better standard in the end. Once we've selected the way we want to go about implementing the technology, we have a draft standard. At this point, the standard is not finalized. It may be changed. In fact, when we're in this draft stage, that's exactly what we do. We evaluate it. It is analyzed by experts within the industry and within the IEEE. They look at all of the specification of the draft standard and they critique it. They rewrite it. They change it and modify it as necessary. Once this process is complete, we go through ratification, which means there is a vote to approve this draft as a final standard. The result then is that we have a standard. Now, this same relative process is used whether we're creating a brand new standard, like the first time 802.11 was ever developed back in 1997 when it was ratified, or when we're adding an amendment to a standard, like 802.11 AC, for example. Now, let's talk about the life cycle of a standard. A standard is not a static thing. It lives. So yes, we do have standards, the original specified documents, but then we have drafts, which are new technologies that may be developed based on these standards. And we have amendments, so the drafts become eventually ratified amendments. And once we have the amendment ratified, it actually becomes part of the standard. That is to say that a standard is the standard and all ratified amendments. The amendments become part of the standard. They are not separate from the standard. And that's very important to know. For example, when we had the 802.11 standard, and then 802.11i was ratified in 2004, it became part of that standard. It was not a separate standard for security. It was the 802.11 standard. At that time, it was an update to Clause 8 of the standard, which for most of the historical life of 802.11 up to this point, Clause 8 has been the security clause. Though, as we'll see, that actually changed with the 802.11 2012 roll-up. So it is a process that standards live in. We have the standards that are the comprehensive documents. Amendments specify technology additions to those standards when they're ratified. And it's important to know that amendment names often become market terminology. For example, you'll often see somebody say, our device supports 802.11i, or you'll even see a box, and on the box it says, this is an 802.11 ABG device, or this is an 802.11 AN device, or an 802.11 GN device, and so forth. What this is telling you is they support the physical layers that were originally implemented in those amendments. That is to say, 802.11b implemented HRDSSS. 802.11a implemented OFDM. 802.11g implemented ERP OFDM. And 802.11n implemented HT. 802.11ac will implement VHT. But guess what? We'll probably see boxes that say this is an 802.11ac device. Standards are rolled up to make amendment documents obsolete. That is to say, when we received 802.11-2007 as a roll-up, 802.11i was then obsolete, as an example. So in other words, we didn't need the separate amendment that is 802.11i anymore because everything in it had been implemented into, rolled up into 802.11-2007. When 802.11-2007 was released as a roll-up, it was just under 1,300 pages. Now we have 802.11-2012. It's, well, almost 3,000 pages. So there's a big difference between them. A lot of amendments were ratified between the 802.11-2007 roll-up and the 802.11-2012 roll-up. But guess what? All of those amendments are part of the standard. Now let's talk about some important terms in summary. We've talked about the standard. This is that living document that when amendments are ratified, they become part of it. An amendment is a way to change the standard. When it's ratified, it becomes part of the standard. While it's a draft amendment, it is not yet part of the standard, even though vendors will often create draft devices. For example, when 802.11n was still in the draft phase, a lot of vendors came out with devices saying that they were compliant with 802.11n draft. Well, we're seeing devices that are 802.11 AC draft as well, and we'll continue to see this into the future, I'm sure. When it's ratified, The amendment becomes part of the standard. It's also important to know this phrase, as amended. Quite often, we'll say the 802.11 standard as amended. What does that mean? It means right up to this very moment, on this very day, not only the standard, but all amendments that have been ratified, let's include them all together, and that is what we call the standard as amended. It's what I've simply been calling the standard, because it is the standard. The standard is the most recent roll-up, is the simplest way to think of it, which right now is 802.11-2012, and all of the amendments. Now, it's also important to know this phrase clause that I've mentioned. And you might wonder, well, what is a clause? I'm going to show you exactly what a clause is by showing you the standard. So let's switch over and take a look at the actual 802.11-2012 standard. So here we are looking at the 802.11-2012 standard. We can see right here it says it's an IEEE standard for information technology. When you're looking at one of these documents, this is a key thing to look at in the IEEE standards. Because if it says it's a standard, then it has been ratified. Notice that it is Part 11. Part 11 of what? Well, it's Part 11 of the 802 project, hence 802.11. The dash 2012, it's the roll-up that was created in 2012. You can see up here at the top that we're looking at page 1, the cover page, of 2,793 pages. This is a big standard. Now, we're talking about clauses. And over here on the left, you see what just looks like a typical table of contents. So we see that we have an overview, normative references, definitions and acronyms and abbreviations, and so on. But these numbered items are what we call clauses. For example, notice Clause 8, frame formats. Now, if you've been following 802.11 for a while, that might have shocked you right there. Because Clause 8 historically has been security. But notice if we scroll down, we see right here, Clause 11 is now security. So they have been rearranged in the 802.11-2012 roll-up. Now that's a very important thing to know. It can be dangerous to say Clause 1 or Clause 2 references this or that thing. It's usually better to simply say the standard states. Now you can reference a clause, but you want to specify the roll-up you're talking about if you reference a clause. It's actually rare that they change the clause numbers, but obviously as we can see here, they do. Let me show you that by flipping over to 802.11-2007. So here is the 802.11-2007 document. And notice what you see right here, Clause 8 is security. See, then Clause 11 was MLME. So things have changed since the 802.11-2007 standard. They've rearranged things, they've restructured things, and it's important to know that when you begin looking at these standards technologies. Now, we're not really going to explore a lot about these specific documents today, but I do want you to see two other kinds of documents related to the 802.11 standard. We're going to now switch over to a draft amendment. So here we're looking at the 802.11 AC Draft 1.3. Notice what does it say? It doesn't say IEEE standard. It says draft standard for information technology. So the wording is clearly different. If we come down, we can see what is this amendment for? Amendment 5, enhancements for very high throughput for operation in bands below 6 gigahertz. And actually, it's specifically in the 5 gigahertz frequency bands is where we're looking at implementing 802.11 AC, which gives you, as stated, a very high throughput physical layer. So what is this standard primarily focused on here, this draft standard? It is primarily focused on Clause 22 right here, very high throughput physical layer specification. You will find that the vast majority of the changes that are being made are in that clause. So this is an example of a draft standard. Now let's switch over and take a look at a ratified amendment. Now here we're looking at 802.11i. Notice it's back to saying IEEE standard. The big difference is instead of just saying Part 11, you can see right here it says it's an Amendment 6 to the MAC security enhancements. And so you can tell the difference quickly between the primary standard and the amendment. Also here at the top, you can see that this is an IEEE 802.11i-2004. That's when it was ratified. It's an amendment to IEEE 802.11 1999 edition 2003 update. So this is telling us that you take a look at 802.11 2003, and this is going to add on to that. And that's how you can figure out exactly what's going on in the standard. So now you understand what a clause is. Now that was a lot to take in for our first lesson, but it gets you started on the right foundation to help you understand these 802.11 standard technologies. Now remember, the 802.11 commentary series will continue to be updated, and you'll be able to access these videos so you can learn more about these standards and understand exactly what they offer to you. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the 802.11 front matter. What do the beginning pages of the standard tell us, and why are they important?